In the quiet land of Umueze, where red soil met endless skies, and the songs of birds rose with the morning mist, preparations for a grand wedding shook the earth. The union between Efeoma and Obinna was not just a wedding, it was history in the making. The villagers had waited months for this day, for it marked the joining of two respected lineages. Obinna was the only child of Pa Dyke, a cocoa merchant whose wealth fed many bellies in the village. Efeoma, the bride, was the radiant daughter of Mama Ejima, the village midwife known for delivering babies with hands gentle as cotton. From the first light of dawn, the air buzzed with excitement. Women pounded yam in rhythm, their wrappers tied high above dust-covered ankles. Young boys scrambled across compounds, chasing goats away from the palm wine jars. Drummers tuned their instruments near the sacred grove as elders offered libations to the spirits of the land. Efeoma sat still in the center of her mother's hut, her skin glowing with palm oil and her hair woven into long black ropes that framed her youthful face. Her body was adorned in white, her wrists wrapped in colorful beads, but her heart beat not with joy, but with fear. 3 moons before the wedding, in the time of ripening plantains, Efeoma had made a choice she could no longer hide. The child growing inside her belly was not Obinna's. She had met Ekene, a traveling basket weaver, during the New Yam festival. He was not from Umueze, nor was he meant to stay, but his eyes carried warmth, and his presence stirred her heart. In a moment when the stars were hidden behind clouds and the village slept, she had allowed herself to be carried away by feelings stronger than tradition. Now, as the wedding bell neared and the crowd gathered under the iroko tree, the weight of her secret grew heavier than the coral necklace around her throat. Obinna stood at the altar, surrounded by kinsmen and blessings, completely unaware of what would soon shake his soul. All of Umueze danced, but the ancestors held their breath. A storm was rising, not one of rain or thunder, but of shame, truth, and a decision that would silence the drums before they could sing her name. As the sun reached its peak and painted the village in gold, the wedding drums began to roar across the 7 compounds of Umueze. The people moved in waves, dancing, singing, ululating. From the youngest child to the oldest elder, each step toward the altar felt like a parade of blessings. The masquerades had come too, spinning in the dust like spirits reborn, their raffiest skirts whispering songs only the wind could understand. The bride's family walked with pride, leading the procession through the narrow paths lined with ogbono trees. Women threw petals of hibiscus and cassava leaves, while men blew into horns carved from antelope bone. In the center of it all was Efeoma, her face veiled, her movements slow, not because of shyness, but because of the storm within. Every step she took toward Obinna was a step deeper into a sea of uncertainty. Her secret grew louder in her ears than the wedding drums that echoed around her. She felt the baby stir within her belly, like a spirit reminding her of what had been done and what had not yet been said. Her mother walked behind her with her hands folded, her eyes scanning the crowd, pretending not to notice the shifting glances from the older women who had begun to whisper. In a village where every wrinkle told a story, the women had already begun to see the fullness of Efeoma's waistline. Obinna stood like a warrior carved from stone, tall, proud, and unaware. His white wrapper fluttered in the wind, his chest broad like the trunk of an iroko, and his face was lit with a smile that could split a calabash. Around him were men who spoke of goats and yams, of harvest and fortune, but none knew what the bride carried behind her veil. The elders sat in silence, their kola nuts shared, their canes resting beside their feet, waiting to bless a union that was already shaking beneath invisible cracks. Even the goats tied near the entrance had grown restless, pulling against their ropes as if sensing the tension hidden in the wind. As Efeoma reached the wooden platform where Obinna waited, the drums suddenly fell silent, as though the spirits themselves had paused. The next moment would not be forgotten, not in this lifetime, nor the next. The moment Ifeoma stepped onto the wooden platform, time seemed to halt. The drums that had thundered like the heart of the gods now stood in silence. The wind carried only the sound of swaying palm fronds and distant rustling feet. Obinna extended his hand toward his bride, not knowing that her silence was heavier than the world. All eyes in Umueze were upon her. Mothers whispered into the ears of daughters. Elders narrowed their gaze. The priestess who sat near the sacred shrine tightened her grip on the staff of truth, carved generations ago from the bone of a leopard. Her wrinkled face twitched, not from age, but from the tremble in the spirit realm. Ifeoma stood before Obinna, barely able to breathe. She felt as though the eyes of her unborn child were staring out from her womb, watching the ceremony unfold. The baby had kicked again, once, twice, a reminder. She was not alone. She had never been alone. The rituals began. A calabash was lifted. Libations were poured onto the earth. The names of the ancestors were called aloud. Each name echoed like thunder across the gathering. When Obinna spoke, his voice carried strength. When Ifeoma opened her mouth, her words faltered. She knew she had reached the edge of a cliff. As the final blessing approached, the priestess stood. Her voice rang clear, not loud, but firm like the rustle of dry leaves in Harmattan wind. She called upon the spirits to witness the union, and with her staff she pointed at the bride. Then the question came, the one every bride in Umueze must answer, and Ifeoma did not speak. The silence grew thick. The birds stopped their songs. Even the sun seemed to dim. She placed her palm upon her belly, a gesture that needed no translation. The people gasped. The women covered their mouths. The men clenched their jaws. Obinna stepped back, confusion etched into his brow. But the priestess only nodded slowly, as though the spirits had whispered the truth to her long ago. A storm had arrived, not of rain or thunder, but of revelation. As Ifeoma's hand rested on her stomach, the silence turned into murmurs. Then murmurs turned into mutters, and mutters into shouts. What had once been a celebration began to unravel like old cloth at the seam. The elders rose from their stools, uncertain whether to speak or remain seated. The women gathered their wrappers tighter, shaking their heads with disapproval and awe. The children stood frozen, eyes wide with innocence, not understanding, but sensing the collapse of something sacred. Obinna's legs felt heavy beneath him. His gaze moved between the priestess and the bride, but it was Mama Ejima, Ifeoma's mother, who stepped forward. Her hands trembled. Her mouth moved as though words would come, but none did. She had known, of course. A mother always knows. But she had hoped the weight of the secret would be buried beneath beads and wine, masked by tradition and celebration. But the land had spoken. In Umueze, nothing could be hidden from the soil. The earth remembered footsteps. The trees whispered stories, and the wind always found a way to carry truth. The people of Umueze were not just watchers, they were feelers, and now they felt betrayal. The priestess raised her staff once more and drew a slow circle in the air. The meaning was clear. It was now time for confession, for cleansing, for consequence. But Ifeoma said no more. Her silence was her shield, her punishment, her freedom. She turned away from the platform. Without a word, without a plea, she stepped down from the stage built to celebrate her union. The coral beads rattled as she moved. The dust clung to her feet like memories she could not wash away. Behind her, the dancers stopped. The masquerade stood still. Even the goats had fallen silent. The wedding had ended, not with vows, but with truth. And the truth had stained the day like palm oil on white cloth. The people of Umueze would speak of that day for many harvests, a day when the gods turned their faces and joy turned to dust. Ifeoma's walk through the village square was long, though her feet moved slowly. The silence that followed her was louder than the drums that had once sung for her. No one spoke. No one sang. Even the wind dared not blow too hard. She passed the sacred well, the place where brides washed before their vows. Its waters, once a symbol of purity, now shimmered in silence, as if waiting to wash away what could not be unseen. The old women watching from the corners of their compounds did not hiss nor curse. They only stared, for they knew that shame did not always need words. It clung to the skin like evening dew. Obinna remained on the platform, frozen in time. His friends touched his shoulder, but he did not move. His bride had walked away. The child she carried was not his. His dreams of legacy had dissolved in broad daylight. But the greater weight came not from betrayal. It came from the eyes of his ancestors, whom he had called moments ago. Mama Ejima returned to her compound alone. Her daughter had disappeared into the bush path behind the yam barns, the path used only when a woman must walk alone. No one followed. No one dared. The elders gathered later that evening under the Iroko tree. No decision was made. Some said Ifeoma had disgraced her family. Others whispered she had saved Obinna from a false beginning. But all agreed the gods had unveiled the truth in their own time. And when night finally fell over Umueze, the stars blinked in silence, as if they too had no more to say. Weeks passed like slow footsteps across hot sand. Ifeoma had not returned to her mother's house. Rumors said she now stayed in an abandoned hut by the edge of the Oji forest, where wild herbs grew and silence kept company with forgotten souls. Some believed she had run to the next village. Others believed she had gone mad. But those who knew her spirit knew otherwise. She had chosen exile. She had chosen truth over comfort. Her belly grew, and with it came the whispers of a coming child, born not of celebration, but of sorrow and secrets. The women at the stream spoke of her with hushed tones. They did not speak her name. Instead, they called her the one who walked away, as if her very name had become too sacred or too shameful to utter aloud. Obinna did not take another bride. His days grew quiet. He no longer joined the men at the market square or offered wine at the festival. He moved through life like a man still chasing his own shadow. Yet, he bore no hatred. In his heart, a war raged between pain and understanding, between honor and humanity. Ikene, the traveler whose seed grew in Ifeoma's womb, never returned. The road swallowed him like many before him. He had come like the wind and vanished like morning mist. And so, the child inside her became a child of two shadows, one present, one lost. When the time came, Ifeoma gave birth under the mango tree behind the hut. There were no midwives, only the stars above and the strength of her bloodline. The child, a boy, cried out strong, as if announcing his arrival not just to his mother, but to the entire earth. And though the night was cold and the village slept, the trees rustled gently, as if to say, the child had been born in truth, and truth, no matter how bitter, will always find a place to grow. The seasons turned gently, as they always did, but time held a different pace for Ifeoma. Her days in the forest hut were quiet. She woke before the cock crowed, bathed her child in cool river water, and sang to him in the voice of her grandmother's songs. His name was Somto, meaning join me in praising. She did not choose the name to impress the village, but to remind herself that life still carried gifts, even after disgrace. The village of Umueze eventually grew used to her absence, but not her silence. They waited for a return. They waited for shame to fade and for the mystery to dry like morning dew. But Ifeoma did not return, for forgiveness. She returned when the child began to walk. One cool evening, as the sky bled into twilight and the scent of firewood filled the air, Ifeoma appeared at the edge of the village path. She wore no beads, no elaborate wrapper, only a plain cloth tied across her chest, with Somto asleep on her back. Her skin was darker from the sun, her feet thick with dust, but her eyes no longer trembled. The women saw her first. They whispered. Then the children ran to fetch the elders, but no one shouted, no one dared. They simply watched. She did not walk like one who had sinned. She walked like one who had survived. The same iroko tree under which she had once stood as a bride now stood to welcome her as a mother. But there was no platform, no priestess, no drums, only earth. And earth does not judge. It records. Her mother, Mama Ejima, was the last to come forward. Her tears did not fall from regret, but from relief. Her daughter had returned, and with her, a child whose eyes reflected 1,000 unspoken truths. The moon rose high that night, and for the first time since the wedding day, the stars blinked brightly. Somto grew like the plantain tree, stubborn, tall, and full of life. He did not ask for toys. He made them from the things the earth provided. He did not ask for stories. He listened to the ones told by firelight and silence. And most striking of all, he never asked about his father. Not because he was unaware, but because his mother's eyes had already told him what he needed to know. The village boys played with him, though their parents warned them to stay wary. That one, they would whisper. His father vanished like dust. But Somto never answered. He simply smiled, showing the strength of someone born in storm, but shaped by calm. The elders watched him from afar. They noticed his intelligence, how he remembered names, how he greeted properly, how he watched the moon as if it whispered to him. One elder remarked, "This boy has the spirit of ancestors not yet born." Obinna also watched. From behind carved windows, from the edge of gatherings, he observed the child. He knew without question that this was the child that was meant to be his. But blood had not joined them, only pain. Still, he did not hate. Instead, he wondered, would things have been different had Ifeoma spoken sooner? Would the shame have felt smaller if it had been shared? And Ifeoma, she never denied Somto the truth. One morning, she took the boy to the same mango tree where she had birthed him. She told him of a traveler who came and left, and how sometimes love is a lesson, not a lifetime. The boy listened, not with sorrow, but with acceptance. Somto was not born from ceremony, but from choice. And though the village never held a naming feast for him, the trees knew his name, the river remembered his cries, and the wind always carried the scent of his presence. Years passed in the village of Umueze, like leaves floating down the stream, gentle, unstoppable. The wounds of the past faded from whispers into memories, but the name Ifeoma still carried a weight, not of shame, but of strength. She had become something rare, a woman who had fallen in daylight and risen in silence. Somto, now nearing 10 seasons, had begun to sit with the elders under the great iroko, not to speak but to listen. He asked questions that surprised even the oldest among them. His eyes carried the hunger of a seeker, and his heart held no anger. He had never known his father, and yet he walked as though the world had fathered him. Obinna watched from afar. His own compound remained without a wife, without laughter, without children. His wealth meant little now. Time had taken its toll, not just on his face, but on his soul. The wedding that never was had left a hollow too wide for any feast to fill. One Harmattan evening, as dry wind swept across the red soil, Obinna walked to the iroko tree. For the first time in many years, His steps were not silent. The villagers paused. Children moved aside. Even the elders straightened their backs. He walked directly to Somto, who stood polishing the gourd he carried for water. And Obinna did what no one expected. He bent. He placed both knees to the earth, not before Ifeoma, but before the child who should have been his. The silence that followed was unlike any before. It was not heavy with judgment. It was filled with honor. Obinna spoke the boy's name, Somto, once, twice, then again. It was the first time he had spoken the name aloud, and the sound carried through the village like a healing wind. He did not ask to be forgiven. He did not ask to be called father. He only offered his respect. And in that moment, Umueze learned something that no elder had written and no shrine had spoken. That sometimes a man becomes great not by what he owns, but by whom he honors. From that day forward, the people of Umueze saw Somto not as the boy without a father, but as the boy who carried the strength of two. He became the child the village could not deny, not because of blood, but because of what he reflected: truth, resilience, and silent wisdom. The elders began to call him to sit beside them during meetings. When decisions were made for the village, he listened, not with pride, but with purpose. The priestess who once pointed her staff at Ifeoma's belly now blessed Somto with kola and chalk. "This one," she said, "was chosen by the ancestors to remind us that truth does not destroy. It prepares." Ifeoma never remarried. She did not need to. Her life was full, with her son, with her garden, and with peace. She had walked through shame and emerged with dignity. Women brought their daughters to her for advice. Girls whispered her name with reverence. Ifeoma had become legend, not for her fall, but for her rise. Obinna continued to live quietly, but not alone. He became a guardian in Somto's journey. He gave land for the boy to farm. He gifted books he had kept from distant travels. And though he never called himself father, he gave the boy the love of a man who had lost, learned, and lived. And the child, Somto, grew. He became a man of great vision, building a school beneath the same mango tree where he had been born. He taught boys and girls the strength of truth, the beauty of resilience, and the courage of choices. When he spoke, even the wind listened. In the twilight of his years, when gray began to lace his hair and the sun no longer burned his back, Somto stood before the new generation and told the tale of a woman who walked away, a wedding that never was, and a village that learned how to heal. And so the story lived on, not in scrolls, not in songs, but in the soil. For in Umueze, the truth was never buried. It bloomed,